A veteran firefighter named John Reynolds put his life in danger to protect others from the fiery Los Angeles fire. However, rather than honor, he received a $10,000 fine. However, this injustice was not overlooked. The following day, a group of SUVs hauling government representatives arrived at John's residence, preparing for an event that would alter his life. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Revealed Stories. I have another one today. A touching tale to tell you. John was a former firefighter who was 73 years old, and someone who has spent decades encountering burning structures as others fled. He had instructed numerous younger firefighters, sharing their knowledge, the knowledge that had previously saved his own life numerous times. Nevertheless, he had retired several years prior. His intuition kept his body robust and sharp. After a lifetime of self-control, he winced as he sat in his living room. He applied cream to the little burns, along with the TV on his forearm, flashed with pictures of his flames. Just arrived from heavy, towering flames, the sky is being swallowed by black smoke, and firefighters fighting to keep Linda, his wife, was sitting next to chaos. Her look with her hands clasped in her lap, unable to read as she looked at him. And then they instructed me to leave the screen. John whispered in a voice laden with annoyance, as if I were a spectator obstructing their path without their knowledge. Linda, I didn't care what I was doing. Gently exhaled while grabbing for the burn. Cream, to them, you're retired, John. John's eyes, just another citizen, he shook his head, and it glistened. Alter the fact that today I rescued lives. The recollection came back to him when it was in Los Angeles that he first learned of the fire. Angeles, a huge flame consuming a residential structure that he hadn't considered. He got into his pickup twice and traveled 15 miles. Kilometers directly to the location by the time sirens were blaring in the street when he arrived. People crying and wailing, and the smoke is so thick. It was difficult to see beyond than a few feet. He was aware that he lacked the protective equipment no more, but he had something as significant as his years. Using his skills and experience, he managed to pass the throng, and inside the building responders hardly gave him a break. He looked inside and saw a family. Two parents are stuck on the second floor, and a young girl whom he led down along the most secure route. Avoiding weak buildings and collapsing beams, John steadied the father as he hesitated. Holding him tightly, "You follow me," and they did one, "and I'll make sure you're safe." He assisted an elderly man one by one, too frail to move a woman by himself, frantically looking for her missing John. The dog knew where to search. Routes that were the safest for timing his transitions between flare-ups. Even in the absence of equipment, he had performed his duties as trained to perform. But when it was finished, and when John eventually went outside, he was worn out, and an officer covered in soot went up to him. "Sir, you must go. Civilians are unable to intervene." John scowled in exasperation. "Interrupting? I just saved lives." The cop hardly hesitated. "I get it, but you're not included in the." John had requested that the reaction team depart now, to dispute in order to show them what he had completed. But it made little difference that they didn't seem to care about him. Since he was only an elderly man, he had departed, driving silently home. But the day's burden bearing down on him, he is currently seated in his living room. Watch the news with his jaw clenched. Anchors commend the valiant efforts of the firefighters putting their names on the list ranks. There is no reference to him, of course. Linda, her voice was softer as she delicately caressed his arm. "You did what you usually do now, Jan. What matters, John, is that people were saved." Taking a deep breath and nodding, perhaps she was yes, but the burn persisted while he sat there. The sting of frustration didn't make it go away. It wasn't about the acknowledgement, but regarding the reality that the world had changed as far as it was concerned. He was just another face, and a loud knock on the door shattered the silence. John and Linda exchanged a quiet. He forced himself up to look at this hour. He sighed quietly as his muscles ached from the day's stress when an officer in a uniform pulled the door open. A clean envelope was standing on the doorstep, and Mr. Reynolds John's forehead was wrinkled. Indeed, The officer displayed that this envelope is for you, John. Don't hesitate. Prior to removing the paper's weight somehow, it was heavier than it ought to be. The words at the top that were bolded made his Titan's stomach note a violation. His gaze swept over the crowded printing, then ceased. $10,000. Linda, looking over his shoulder, sharply inhaled 10,000. There was a mixture of shock in her voice. With astonishment at what the officer shifted his posture and his face impartial as he started enumerating that the entire fine includes $3,000 in penalties. For entering a restricted area without authorization, $5,000 for the emergency location for not obey emergency personnel, and $2,000 for putting one's own safety at danger. John chuckled hollowly, trembling at his head, putting his own safety in peril. I pulled as I gently raised his scorched hand. I was saving the lives of folks out there, not just loitering and snapping photos. That the officer didn't. I can appreciate your aggravation, Sir Flinch. However, the purpose of these legislation is to avoid needless dangers. His voice was calmly, as though he had provided this a dozen times before. You have the opportunity to 30 days to file an appeal. John, his mouth was clenched. There was no use in claiming that he had been fired once at the scenario instructed to depart like some careless civilian who was unaware of his identity currently. They were giving him a fine, as though he had been an annoyance rather than someone who had put his life at danger to assist. If he had, Linda would have crossed her arms, simply observed folks burning while standing there. Would the cop have been better off doing that? Paused for a moment, then glanced as though he had something else to say, but instead, he just gave a curt nod. Be careful. And then he turned to go. John stood away when the door clicked shut, staring at the fine notice in silence in his palms. Linda reached for her reading with $10,000. Glasses are more of a habit than a need. I went over the paper once more without that anything was altered by it. They had saved up $10,000 for silence. John ran years for security, not for this. He ran a hand through his hair and looked at the fine notice again, which he had previously handled many unanticipated twists in life. But he also rubbed this other thing. A weary sigh escaped his cheeks, but beyond the silent confines of his house, the tale had already escaped his understanding that the fine notice wasn't kept at A for a long time. Private matters had a way of risk spreading, particularly within the fire station. A few of John's previous co-workers that he had instructed men who continued to carry that they learned about it from the lessons he gave them. Discussions began in the dressing rooms. While working late shifts around coffee pots, this is what he receives for saving people. A firefighter whispered, trembling his head of a second. Younger firefighter, Jan had coached years before, scowled as people on the phone need to know about this. Before long, the annoyance wasn't limited to the story found its way to the department cleaning up outside the firehouse wall. Steam, initially as whispers in nearby eateries, then as contentious internet debates, then posted an old picture of John and his firefighters' equipment in front of a burned-out structure. A hero who was penalized for saving lives reappeared. Where can I find a Justice One post? Accumulating thousands of shares, a local reporter learned about it. Penalizes a former firefighter for this, is what he was taught to do. Give the comment to those who were protecting us. Section was a storm, and people were furious, asking for clarification, and it wasn't just the fire department was overloaded with talk calls. Pressure from emails flooded City Hall, was constructing, and then someone took observe that not simply anybody who had the ability to alter events at the dining. John and Linda sat quietly at the table. Their plates hardly made contact with the fine observation, remained in their thoughts to the force of its weight pressing against the evening. Jan looked at the phone when it called. It was late when I looked at Linda before responding. Mr. Reynolds, it's too late for a casual call. We must speak with John, said the firm voice. Paused a while before responding to Mr. The speaker said, Ray Reynolds, hold the line. The mayor will talk to you. About a heavy, brief pause, followed by a fresh voice arrived through a steady, measured, and unachievable to read about Mr. Reynolds. We've heard on the fine and what transpired today. John laid it all out for you to hear. The fire that confined the individuals inside the decisions he made in a flash to save lives that he had trained for years. Firefighters conducting rescue operations and performing anything necessary to keep others safe was never about becoming noticed, simply doing what was appropriate. And now, rather than thankfulness, he was being fined for heeding the intuition developed over a duty for a lifetime. Yet he wasn't finished. He couldn't simply observe from a distance. From a background, if there was a method to continue to assist in carrying out what he was intended to accomplish, he would accept it from Mayor. Listen without being interrupted. No response with no sign of agreement or rejection, simply silence. Followed by a reply, John. I hear you gave me 24 hours, that was it. With no justification guarantees, just a succinct answer. One that left more queries than responses. Although, because of the way it was said, it evident that this wasn't the final. John put the phone down after the chat. Linda watched slowly across the table. His worry was visible on her face. What was that? What she said, leaning slightly in. John let out a still breath. The mayor instructed me to wait 24 hours for processing. Linda scowled for hours at what he shook. I don't understand his head. Know that they have reached a state of silence. Unsure, intrigued, perhaps even hoping for they could only wait for John's thought about the conversation over, and two looking for significance in the wait 24 hours. Yet the mayor's ambiguous words, a silent change behind the uncertainties, was already moving. But John was unable to forecast the upcoming day. Would not only provide clarifications, but something more bigger than what he ever anticipated when daylight eventually arrived. It introduced the well-known beat of a new day. But there was a feeling in the air. A different John was in the yard outside, taking care of minor duties. Yet his thoughts wasn't on them, and the sun had just begun to rise, creating long shadows in the silent street, followed by a low rumble that came from miles at first. But then from the corner, an unmistakable procession of black SUVs appeared, traveling in ideal synchronicity. Of their shadowy surfaces shimmered beneath the rising sun, while the SUVs advanced with silent authority. Rolled in, moving with purpose. Curtains were stirred by precise neighbors. Whispers, shifting doors cracked open, stretched across the still street. Followed by the first SUV pulled up in front of John's. Breath slowed. Hands in his residence naturally sat by his sides while he stepped forward and called his name, Linda. Linda's voice was firm but steady. Noticed the weight in his voice before to the she even registered her words as she approached, her brow furrowing at the window. Then she realized that this was more than just the mayor's visit in the SUVs that followed security guards and other city alongside the high-ranking authorities. Gasped for a brief moment. Then in unison, the doors opened. The mayor was the first to appear. Wasn't shocking, but the individual who an authoritative person came next. Taking command of the National Fire Service, Jan, met their gaze. This was more than just thankfulness. It was larger issue. The mayor and the fire chief was in front of Jan. Their phrases that convey a message that goes beyond the mayor express gratitude and praise. Initially, that fine shouldn't have been. John wasn't punished for what you did. Manage all of it without having to concern yourself with the burden that had held to John's chest ever since that when the message was abruptly removed. It was knowing him is more important than the money. Wouldn't need to bear that weight, which made a change. The fire chief grinned. He took a step forward while holding a badge as a modest but distinctive item. He gestured firmly, yet respectfully, grasped and placed it on John's shirt. You joined us, John, but it's only you stand among us, right? Jan ran his fingers across the metal, sensing its weight in his hand, as well as in what honorary firefighter wasn't what it meant. It was merely a title, an invitation to. There was something about the fire chief's expression, more profound than thank you, John. We are able to assign you titles and honors throughout the day, but I sense as a man, you don't want a plaque on the wall that a man likes to do something genuine. He took his hand under his jacket and tugged out a well-formatted paper that extends. It is not an official invitation to Jan, merely a thank you gesture, but provide one that acknowledged not just what, despite all he had done, there was still. Are you going to avoid burning buildings? The fire chief carried on with a steady tone, but with a hint of admiration. But experiences such as yours, that's beyond our means. Jan took the document and scanned it to lose phrases that allowed them to calm the fire chief. Said John, would not be on the front lines, not engage in risky operations intended for younger firefighters instead. His intuition and expertise would be useful. He would mentor them where they were most important. Young firefighters helping out during drills, assisting them in navigating the difficult lessons that were not available for learning from textbooks only. And in addition to that, he would act as a fire safety community teacher in a school of education, arranging meetings for working families with active firefighters to make sure people were aware of how to defend themselves, how to live when every second counted. John allowed the weight of everything to settle this. Was more than just thankfulness. It was faith, opportunity to grab all of his money years of study, refined every instinct via experience, and place it in the most important. And now he could Linda put a hand next to him, his arm, her eyes gleaming without surprise. However, she was proud to have known via each late-night news report that caused him to shake his head during each he had a restless moment, and wished he could she knew this was who he was. So she did more. Was now seen by everyone as a city. Official next to the fire chief brought the document forward, just a Mr. Reynolds' signature. And it's official without hesitating. John accepted the pen, writing his name with firm determination. But the fire chief welcomed everyone with an affirmative nod. On board John, the gravity of the situation set in. A fresh chapter with a new goal. The station was bustling with bustle as new for drills. Recruits waited in line. But today they weren't only picking up knowledge from textbooks that John was teaching them. He passed through the practice area, pointing out mistakes and encouraging them to act more quickly and intelligently. His voice was firmly grasped. His hands later at the community center. He addressed a group of households exhibiting fire safety in response to inquiries. He examined the parents of the children clinging to each phrase and understood that this was the way life weren't destroyed by the flames. Began across the room while Linda observed. He smiled softly at this point, not only in the past, but also in recollections of the man who was once the officers who initially rejected John as an ace civilian who was interfering, now stood at the reflection of their eyes in the back of the room. They had observed his bravery with calm respect, an operation. But today they saw the genuine heart of a man who didn't look for acknowledgement, only the opportunity to serve, and after that, protect in the manner he knew best. A senior officer entered the meeting, moved forward and held out a hand. You, John, you have earned more than just a badge. Earned. Our John accepted the handshake with deference. As the families scattered, calm humility, and the recruits went back to their exercises. John went outside to get some fresh air. Calm as the fire was illuminated by the afternoon sun, a golden-hued station, and Linda slipping her hand. She joined him in silence. The world felt different to him now. John Reynolds, lighter, more significant, once troubled by recollections of what was now, lost, was standing where he really belonged. Not as a heroic figure stuck in the past, but rather as a roadmap that keeps the future in mind and safeguarding people before the flames ever began. If you like this video, please don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. Sponsorship enables us to produce more incredible material. View the videos on the screen for other thrilling tales that I appreciate them and won't want to miss them. Observing, and we'll talk to you in the following video.